The Demolisher, a tank that was made to fear no mech. I personally think of the Demolisher as a construction vehicle. That is, a constructor of monuments to war, like this one. Now let's crack open the good old TRO 3026, the vehicle one, and let's see what we got. Flip through and find the Demolisher in its original glory. Here's like all these famous vehicles like the Warrior and J. Edgar and these other things, and Scorpion, Hunters, all kinds of things like that. Here's the Striker. We gotta come back to it a little bit. That is one of the nicest vehicles, as I'll go over later. And then we also got some of these various hover vehicles. Some people like these a lot. They're pretty combat effective C-bills wise. There's the LRM Carrier. This is the natural mate to the Demolisher, so pay attention to this one. The Manticore, one of the best all-around tanks. Some support vehicles, and finally, the Demolisher. There she is in all her glory, and there's their little flavor text page. And here is the Demolisher photographs of the pages to make it easier to read. Basically an ICE engine, heavy armor all around, especially on the front and the turret. The AC-20s. And here's the story text from the 3026 TRO. And there's like a neat hero tank called the Hildegard, whose main feature is it always kills off its crew without taking much damage. In the 3026 TRO, it said there weren't any known variants, but pretty soon after there were a whole bunch, so let's go over them. The standard Demolisher, or the one that you assume you have when someone says Demolisher, that is the 3025 variant, is just 2 AC-20s and enough armor to take 2 AC-20 shots either in the front or even in the turret. But it has no backup weapons, being that it's just the pure perfection of twin AC-20s, you want to pair it up with something that has long range. The Arrow variant is basically an arrow platform. If you want to, instead of using the longbow as an arrow platform, you've got a Demolisher option. Then there's the Clan Demolisher, which is basically just twin LBX-20s and medium pulse lasers with also a backup machine gun too. But it's Clan tech, so I don't know if you want it. Then there's a Gauss variant. Kind of just super long range, slightly less damage version. It is pretty effective though. The MRM variant is basically, instead of having an LRM carrier that is an MRM carrier, just put a whole bunch more armor on it, and then you get the Demolisher MRM. The Demolisher AC-C3 is my personal variant, except that I nerfed it to reduce its battle value. It was originally had twin ultra autocannon 20s and a C3 on it, but instead I just put regular autocannon 20s, a C3, and a tag on it. That was because otherwise its battle value was too high for a certain lance configuration that I wanted. Note that in these combat sims, it underperforms because it doesn't have any buddies to take advantage of the C3 system, but in a team, it is much more powerful, even with just simple AC-20s. The Devastator is like a 100-ton version of the Demolisher. Just think of it almost like a SLDF, House Cameron Royal-style Demolisher. The Demolisher 2 is another 100-ton upgrade version, except this time has one ultra autocannon and one LBX-20. This is similar to my twin ultra autocannon version, except that was only 80 tons and still had ultra autocannons. So let's see how these variants do in the round-robin tournament. In order, the best absolute units are the MRM, the Gauss, and then the Clan Demolishers. Although the twin ultra autocannon personal variant was actually up there as well. But those are either not 3025 or their clan or something like that, so you may or may not want to use them in your scenarios. However, their battle values are also much higher than the standard Demolisher, which is only 981. After correcting for battle value, the MRM is still the best Demolisher, at least in terms of wins per battle value. However, the Gauss and the Clan are not too far behind, and neither is the Devastator. However, when you look at C-bills, some of these designs are fairly expensive, so their wins per C-bill are not as good. But the Demolisher MRM, because MRMs are so cheap, are still good per C-bill, as are the Gauss and the Standard Demolisher, which are all roughly equal. The Standard Demolisher is actually slightly better than the Demolisher Gauss. However, the Demolisher 2 is fairly effective. And if you're playing for tonnage, well, the obvious choices seem to jump out. The Demolisher MRM is the best, as are the Gauss and the Clan, which are basically the highest tech versions, because, well, higher tech always wins per tonnage. The Demolisher, as a reminder, is often paired with a long-range DPS unit, because the Demolisher is a short-range DPS / brawler type unit. So catapults, riflemen, anything with LRMs, in particular the LRM Carrier, or possibly even a striker, are good pairings with it. Of important note, the perfect vehicle to supplement a Demolisher is the LRM Carrier, and the two work very well together hand in hand. I do have a different video that covers the LRM Carrier, but because one sees them together so often, it's worth it to bring it up again and look at the specs here. So there are many variants of the LRM Carrier, but just taking the vanilla variant, it's 3 LRM-20s and 4 tons of ammo, which gives you 8 shots. Note that usually the Demolisher closes later and the LRM Carrier is going to be depleted first. And the reason this works almost every time is because the twin AC-20s and the armor of the Demolisher make it such a serious threat that the opponent cannot risk wasting shots on the LRM Carrier, even though the LRM Carrier would be easily taken down as it has paper-thin armor. This gives time for the LRM Carrier's massive damage-dealing capability to do its job. The beauty of this strategy and this combo is that even if the opponent knows that they can easily take out the LRM Carrier if they just focus on it, it's very hard or even just impossible to bring yourself to do that. If you're facing an LRM Carrier and a Demolisher, and that Demolisher's twin AC-20s are slowly getting closer to you, no matter what mech or vehicle you have, you're gonna just think, man, I should shoot at that Demolisher. This is better than just Demolishers because the LRM Carrier shots create clusters of 5, so an LRM-20 might generate even up to 4 cluster hits. So really the Demolisher's job is to puncture through armor on a mech anyway, and then the LRM Carrier's cluster hits do internal damage and eventually crit it out or take it out or just do raw damage. This is also the same reason why the Striker does well with the Demolisher, in that because it has that SRM, so you get clusters from the Striker's LRMs, but you also get clusters out of the SRM shots. So the Demolisher punctures through the armor, and then the Strikers, SRMs, and LRMs go for crits. But unlike the LRM Carrier, the Demolisher can stand on its own, because as long as you have the ability to close with the enemy, or you start off in a close range fight, like perhaps a city fight. But ironically, the Demolisher does not do well against the LRM Carrier, because the LRM Carrier can just drive backwards while peppering the Demolisher from range, eventually motive hitting it or critting it out. Another unit that is particularly dangerous for Demolishers is the Warrior. Not because the Warrior has any hope of actually penetrating the armor of the Demolisher, but because the Warrior is so fast and has such a long range that it can peck away with its AC2, eventually motive hitting or possibly even crew kill with a crit on the Demolisher without going through the armor. And this is really made possible just from the combination of the speed and the range of the Warrior, because when you want to get motive hits, you want to hit a tank from its sides, not from its front or its back, but from its sides. And the Warrior can do that because of its speed and range, and the Demolisher has no hope of catching it or shooting it. With all that being said, the Demolisher is still a completely badass tank. It's not really meant to be out on itself alone, because it's just too short range. So when you put a Demolisher on the table, you want it to be in a group or a large lance or a company or some mixture of units, because you need to protect it from long-range peck-off shots like Warriors or whatever else the opponent might have. And you really want to use it to just charge straight on into the middle of the fight and go for the biggest mech or vehicle that the enemy has and just charge right at it. For example, if you have what I call the LRM Fortress, which is a bunch of Demolishers and LRM Carriers in a formation, then you would just have your Demolishers concentrate on whatever assault mechs are attacking you, and the LRM Carriers provide the support, and the Demolishers protect the LRM Carriers from like locusts and wasps and other small things that will try to come in to get them. Okay, so let's see some actual combat. So I've taken the Demolisher LRM Carrier combo, and in a previous video for the LRM Carrier, I fought them against a Mackie, but this time we're going to fight against an AS-70 Atlas. This might be kind of boring and long at this point, because I'm just going to go through a bunch of battles and show you the end results. Although the first battle I'll go through it in more detail. But the purpose of this is to give you a intuitive feel for how strong the Demolisher and LRM Carrier are compared to, for example, an Atlas. And once you have that feel, then you'll be confident using these units. So for the first round of combat, the Atlas can hit the back and the LRM Carrier can hit with their LRMs. So that's the beginning of combat. AC-20s and other weapons are still out of range. There was one hit from one of the LRM-20s, and from the LRM Carriers hitting the Atlas, and all the other shots missed. Okay, round 2. Now, still mostly LRM exchanges between the Atlas and the LRM Carrier. The Demolisher is trying to close rank and is almost in range. The Atlas has been firing on the Demolisher and has scored some damage on the front armor of the Demolisher, whereas the LRM Carrier has hit both the legs of the Atlas. So far, this is starting off quite similar to the Mackie versus Demolisher LRM Carrier battle. You would expect the LRMs from the LRM Carrier to splatter more on the Atlas than they actually are, but there is a bug that prevents the display of very light amounts of damage, like a single cluster of LRMs. So the armor on the Atlas is actually scratched up all over, even though it doesn't show anything other than damage to the legs. Round 3. Finally, the AC-20s are in range. The Atlas has been popping off its various weapons previously, but now the AC-20s are engaged on both sides. So far, the Atlas has taken the worst of it, being that it's being shot at by 2 vehicles, and it has damaged the Demolisher, but not killed it. The Atlas is starting to fire more and more weaponry and is starting to actually build up some heat. And also, one of its arms has been destroyed, and one of its legs is just barely holding together with internal structure. However, the Demolisher has been killed. Not only has its turret taken hits, but its front has been penetrated and the internal structure completely destroyed, killing the crew, so the Demolisher is out of the picture. However, in the next round, the LRM Carrier finishes taking out one of the torsos and the leg, which will cause the Atlas to fall down. Also, the LRM Carrier has taken a hit in the front. It barely has enough armor to withstand like a PPC or some laser hits, but it has survived. In the next round, the Atlas manages to finish off the LRM Carrier. However, its center torso is almost completely destroyed, and one of its torsos and one of its legs are destroyed, so it's standing on one leg. And also its rear armor has been damaged and penetrated, and its gyro has taken a hit. So the Atlas won this time, but took severe damage, including almost having its center torso cored out. So this was quite a close battle. Neither side really seemed to have an advantage, being that it was such a close battle. So was this just a fluke? What would happen if you were to play this a few more times? Would the outcome have been the same? So I'll just show the end scenes of the next few battles. Here, the Atlas was destroyed and the head shot off, similar to the Mackie. So the third time around, this time Friedrich Olafsson of the Atlas was victorious, and Tellman's mistake. Next time around, this is yet another Solaris game where you have an Atlas against an LRM Carrier and Demolisher. However, in an unusual twist of fate, the Atlas somehow decided to take out the LRM Carrier. Now, I've coded up a bunch of AI, and sometimes I don't even know what they're doing, but here the LRM Carrier got taken out and the Demolisher survived. So yet another trial. Now, so far we've had the Atlas win, the Demolisher survive, the LRM Carrier survive, various different results. This time around, it's another Solaris game, except the LRM Carrier survives, everybody else dies. Next time around, the Atlas barely squeaks out a win, and both the LRM Carrier and the Demolisher are destroyed. And this was on the world of Santander 5 on featureless plains. And the Atlas is kind of hot at the end too, and lost some legs. I looked at this one in a little more detail, and what happened at the end is the Demolisher was destroyed, but the LRM Carrier had run out of ammo, but had been demobilized with motive hits. And even though the Atlas had lost its legs, it was able to crawl slowly at speed 1 closer and closer towards the LRM Carrier, kind of like the end of Terminator 1. And it finally caught up to the LRM Carrier and finished it off. Next battle looks kind of similar to some of the others. The Atlas barely squeaks out a victory. LRM Carrier is almost out of ammo, and Demolisher is killed still with plenty of ammo on board. And then finally, the final battle that I've replayed out for you. The Atlas has a more convincing victory in that it still has both its arms and both its legs, but it's mostly shot up all over the place, but still takes out the opponents, which are, unfortunately, our Demolisher and LRM Carrier. Hopefully this gives you a good understanding of what you do with a Demolisher and also how you support it. You do not go around sending it out alone, but in theory you could, because it just can get taken advantage of because of its lack of long-range weapons. In fact, if you pay attention in almost all the battles, the mech is trying to back off as fast as possible, which is at speed 3, whereas the Demolisher is trying to charge forward as fast as possible, which is speed 5, because the mech is trying to use its long-range weapons to outrange the Demolisher. There is one bug in my replay graphics, and that is the mechs do not show lightly scratched armor damage. It's probably some logic flaw in the printout routine, but basically the O's should be replaced with zeros when the armor is only lightly scratched. That works on the vehicles, but not on the mechs right now. Well, that sums up the Demolisher for now, although perhaps it'll show up again in later videos as as like a co-star or something. I'm sure it will, especially since I still have not revealed the secret answer to the second puzzle of the Steiner Scout Squad versus the LRM Fortress. One more comment regarding the Demolisher and miniatures. When the Demolisher first came out as one of the early Battle Droids era type vehicles, it actually was oversized and had 4 tank treads. So it's like a super giant size version of the Demolisher. The next printed metal Demolisher is basically the standard Demolisher that you would just get now.